Okay, and I will turn it over to Julie Goddard, who will moderate the last part of today, which is another roundtable on research needs in food waste and loss reduction.
Thanks, Martin. For those just joining, my name is Julie Goddard. I'm a professor in the Department of Food Science at Cornell University in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. I'm also a fellow at the Cornell Atkinson Center for Sustainability, and I'll lead today's roundtable on research needs in food waste and loss reduction. Very quickly, some housekeeping as we chat. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat box. If you want to direct it towards a particular panelist, which I'll introduce shortly, please note that in your question. And we'll address those questions at the end of the session after the group conversations. So like I said, we're here to discuss the research needs to help meet the USDA and US EPA's goals for cutting our nation's food waste by 50% in the year 2030. And that's in alignment with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And if you're here today, you're already aware of the current crisis around food waste and loss. Martin and the other speakers gave excellent introductions about different areas that we can approach reducing food waste and loss. And there's a myriad of approaches that can be taken. And what's interesting is that we've talked about also the different stage along the farm to fork continuum that can have an effect. And it's interesting that there can be waste and loss at each stage. And we know that the further along the farm to fork continuum that it happens, the further along in the supply chain, there's a significantly increased environmental impact because you have the fuel for distribution, you have the energy costs for production, you have the human labor costs, et cetera. So cost is more than $1, right? So there's things like that that we need to think about beyond just what we initially think of, which is piles of rotten food. So with that introduction, I'm excited to kick off this afternoon's roundtable discussion by introducing my colleagues who bring a wide and varied viewpoints on this exciting conversation about research needs in reducing food waste and reducing food loss. So I'd like to ask the panelists to please briefly introduce yourself, a little bit about your background, your interests, your affiliation, and then we'll go on to the meat of the roundtable, which is an engaging discussion. So Sam, I see you're first on my screen here in the little square that I see you. So if you don't mind introducing yourself.
Hi, everyone. Again, Sam Alcaine. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Food Science, and my research really focuses on how do we use microbiology to drive sustainability in food systems.
Thank you, Sam. Abby?
Hi guys, I'm Abby Snyder. I'm an assistant professor as well in food microbiology in the food science department here at Cornell. So at a high level, I guess my lab studies microbiology of extreme environments. A lot of food systems are kind of extreme, right? Acidic, dry, lots of biocide exposure if you think about survival on surfaces and sanitation. So my group tries to understand how spoilage microbes can persist under those conditions, and then we figure out ways to better manage them. And so we use different tools, you know, whole genome sequencing and metagenomics. We also try and apply systems thinking and take more of a process-based approach and collaborate with industry on some of that work.
Thanks, Abby. Alejandro?
Good afternoon, all, and thank you for the invitation. Alejandro Masalta, I'm Senior Vice President of Quality, Food Safety, and Regulatory for Chobani. I've been with Chobani almost 9 years now. Before Chobani, I was with Campbell Soup Company, McDonald's Corporation, and General Mills. So always working in the industry. I'm associated with the council, the industry council of just the council at Cornell. So very happy always to participate with Cornell. So thank you for that. And yeah, mainly my entire career has been in the industry.
Thanks for being here, Alejandro. Renata?
I'm sorry that my room is dark. I'm in a sales office of Chobani, and this is the only room that I found that I could come to. So
no worries.
Dark.
The connection's good. It works.
Okay, good. Perfect.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. You just heard from me, so I'll keep it short. Renata Ivanek. I'm Associate Professor of Epidemiology at Vet School, and my whole life has evolved about One Health, and then food waste and food loss is like an integral part of food security and health. So fits in really well.
Great. And last but certainly not least, Turner.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the invite. This is Turner Wyatt. I'm the CEO of the Upcycled Food Association.
Great to have you here. Alejandro, I have a question for you, and any panelist can, of course, answer any of these questions if you want to chime in. But can you offer some industry perspectives on how things like supply chain can drive research needs around product shelf life? And if you have any other thoughts on strategies for industry to avoid finished good food waste?
Yeah, I mean, to give it a lot of thought on that, we're always constantly doing shelf life studies. And you know that the longer the shelf life, it goes associated with profitability and better distribution. And sometimes we also have to think about shelf life in terms of not just finished good waste, but for example, if I have certain SKUs that don't sell as much as others, and I need to run them and then stop the line, and I need to CIP or clean on that, I'm wasting chemicals, I'm wasting water. So there's other waste that is being produced. So the longer the shelf life, it allows me to build more inventory and have longer runs, minimizing waste at the plant. Now, in terms of the shelf life of the product, and we know that mainly is an issue related to spoilage more than food safety. Normally, we release products that is safe, and then over shelf life, it gets to a point that the sensory start to kick in or the spoilage start to kick in. So those are the main two problems: the sensory and the spoilage that could affect the shelf life. I mean, on the sensory for us at Chobani sometimes it's difficult because we are an all natural brand. So we cannot add additives or things to help the color of a strawberry to stay red, or it's just like it is what it is. And when you have it on top of yogurt that produces lactic acid, the strawberries become brown, and it gets to one point that you're eating a strawberry that is brown. That's not good. So we cannot extend the shelf life. So research needs will be what natural ways do we have to maintain those key sensory aspects of food and fruits, colors, and smells that will not degrade, deteriorate over shelf life based on the combination or composition of the food. The other piece of shelf life that I said is mainly the spoilage. There has been a lot of research over the years. There was one buzz thing that I heard on and off during my career, which were biosensors to have directly installed on the line, and has been for decades a buzz. I've never seen any good research to say, here's a biosensor that you can put to your yogurt line. If there is an yeast, you will detect it right away. And it works all the time. That to me continues to be an interesting research need to see how can we add to our lines biosensors that will detect if something is being contaminated. I have to know that we did a lot of research with Martin and his team at Cornell on yeast spoilage of yogurt. We have no antimicrobials, we have no preservatives, so we depend on excellent CIP and very, very clean lines to produce a good yogurt that will last for a long time. And when we did a lot of research also, I think there is not much research on spoilage organism, and the area of spoilage organism I think continues to deserve more attention if we want to stop waste. We found, as we identified through whole genome sequencing and genetic methods, a lot of different strains that we isolated over the years, especially years ago when we started this project. And then we found that some of them could be in the yogurt at the beginning, and in little numbers can grow over shelf life and create a spoilage problem. Some of them can be in higher numbers, but they will never grow in a yogurt that is loaded with lactic acid bacteria. So to learn more about what type of organism will spoil my product, do I need to destroy this batch that got this organism? How can I quickly say, no, this is the organism, we have research to say that this is not a food safety concern and it's not going to create spoilage over shelf life. Those are the types that I think that I stop here for now and see, but those are the two things, natural things that will enhance the sensory and will maintain the sensory of certain ingredients. And then how do we detect faster? I mean, time to results is key, and biosensor was something always hot there, but never came to fruition, to say, how can I detect things quickly in my line to see if something goes wrong, I can stop right away without minimizing waste, or I can decide it's going to be okay or it's not going to be okay.
These are great perspectives. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Sam, We heard from you earlier on some of the work that you and your group are doing on upcycling whey into value-added beverages and things like that. But can you think of other examples or offer any other ideas around innovations for upcycling waste streams within dairy, outside of dairy, et cetera, that could then become so-called revenue streams?
Yeah, I mean, well, we can go to the classic example. I mean, I always love dairy, right? Dairy really started it in that when we thought about cheese whey initially, right? It was treated a lot like yogurt whey, and then they realized the value of the whey protein that they were throwing away, and they developed a whole new industry around it that now drives value. And in some cases, there are some companies that are making cheese to get the whey protein, right? Instead of making, having the whey protein as the byproduct. Now, in other industries, we're beginning to see a lot, and I don't want to steal Turner's thunder, but the Upcycled Food Association is great. There are a lot of startups in the space. So, like, for example, there's Dan over at Regrained, and so they have they developed this with USDA, a patented drying technology that they use then to dry the grain left over from brewers, right? So the spent brewers grain. And then they take that and they're using that grain as an input, right? They'll make it into a flour, and it's an input for like cake mixes, pizza mixes. They made puffs from it. They're also working it as a base ingredient to go to other companies with. And they've been around now for a couple of years, and they're driving value. So I think that's a really cool example of the kind of work that's being done. It's not always just small companies. There are big companies that are also associated with the Upcycled Food Association. So, for example, International Flavors and Fragrances, IFF. They've done a bit of work around, taking extracts from otherwise discarded commodities like pieces of turmeric and things like that to then make ingredients that can be used to flavor foods or add color to foods, right, in this natural way. And so I think companies are realizing that there is value in exploring the space, whether it's, extracting value from waste products or then taking waste products and really just turning them into ingredients that we should be using in our foods. So.
Well, thank you,
And
Sam.
I'd say,
go ahead.
Another area to think about is we like to sling around the word innovation, but sometimes it doesn't need to be innovation. There are a lot of cultures around the world that use foods differently and have a history, right, of utilizing every piece of a food that's part of their culture and they're part of their dishes, and learning about those and then applying those practices. Are other alternatives then again to help mitigating food waste in this product development kind of thing.
That's a really good perspective to offer, that sometimes we don't need to think of new things, but rather identify things that maybe are historically utilized in reducing food waste and avoiding, I guess, food waste to begin with, right? That's a really excellent point. It looks like Turner's put in the chat. So those of you that are interested, Turner's put in the chat a directory of members in Upcycled Food Association. And with that, it's probably a really good transition to ask you, Turner, if you could give your thoughts on opportunities NGOs can offer in this space, and maybe describe a little bit to us your organization's certification program.
Sure. Yeah, Sam, no worries on stealing the thunder. You just teed me up. You set me up. I'll put it that way. So the directory, it's a new searchable directory. So if you want to find like an upcycler in XYZ country or based on a couple different variables, helpful tool in there that's free. And there's about 200 businesses in there now. So Sam, just scratch the surface. There's big companies, like you said, IFF, also, Target, US Foods, Del Monte, Dole, the biggest of the big, all the way down to some of these startups like the ones that I mentioned that are using dairy co-products. So tons of innovation and tons of really exciting products that are getting invented here as a way to prevent food waste, and that's what the upcycled industry is all about. Empowering consumers to prevent food waste with the products they buy. And it all started through the lens of nonprofits. I was the executive director of Denver Food Rescue, small food security, health equity, community-based nonprofit in Denver, Colorado, for about 7 years. And one of the problems that we ran into as an organization that sort of inadvertently was involved with the food waste industry by picking up food that would otherwise go to waste from grocery stores and delivering it to lower income families was we had way too much bread. No one wants it. there's way too much of it. What do you do with it? So we did things like upcycling into beer. There's fermentable starches in bread, and you can make beer. We followed the toast model. I think people are familiar with toast ale. And there's been other businesses that have started with that, similar models around the world, including ones in the UFA membership. We took our bagels and the excess bagels, made bagel chips, sold them for top dollar at the farmer's market. So it really was a way for me. Originally, upcycling had nothing to do with the for-profit industry. It was like a way for these cash-strapped nonprofits to be more financially independent. And so upcycling, really, anyone where there's food, there's waste, and where there's waste, there's opportunity. So anyone that's involved with the food system, whether you're a tiny nonprofit food rescue organization or a Chobani or anyone in between, there's opportunity to be a part of this massive explosion in the upcycled industry that we're experiencing right now, and be a part of that best solution to global warming while creating value for your company, creating value for your nonprofit like Denver Food Rescue did. And we want to do this also in a way that is traceable and rigorous and trustworthy and measurable, falsifiable. So we created Upcycled Certified in order to accomplish all of those things. So Upcycled Certified is our certification program. And if you follow the link that I sent in the chat before, you can find your way to more info on Upcycled Certified. But it's the world's first and only third-party verified product certification program for both products and B2B ingredients that helps measure and track food waste prevention. And so what this does is it's a consumer education tool, which is really important because while most people, about 80% of people would want to buy an upcycled product, currently less than 10% of people know what they are. It's also a tracking tool that helps us make statements like, okay, for every, Superfrau or Spare Food Company upcycled whey beverage that you buy, you're preventing X pounds of food waste as the consumer. That company is preventing X pounds of food waste, and the industry is preventing X times many millions pounds of food waste. And we just started this program a number of months ago, and we've so far certified about 200 products, which is about roughly half of the products that are being created currently by the current membership of about 200 businesses. So we're not there yet, but we're really impressed to learn that just within those first 200 products, the industry is preventing just over 800 million pounds of food waste every year. So we're only halfway to cataloging just the products that are already in our membership, much less the ones that are coming up every day. And already at almost 1 billion pounds of annual food waste prevention. So huge, absolutely huge impact that this industry can have, and just a fraction of what it will ultimately be. So thanks.
That's really cool. Thanks, Turner. That's putting pounds like that to the numbers, to the statistics that earlier in the day the numbers we heard were so sad and disappointing. I think that's really uplifting and good to hear. Renata, I was really intrigued to see kind of your background as an epidemiologist and doing numerical modeling, and how that work can have such an interesting impact on advancing research in reducing food waste. So I was curious if you could share a little bit your perspective on what might be considered a non-traditional collaboration in advancing research.
Wow, that's a great question. It's hard to say what's traditional, what's non-traditional nowadays. But I think we are evolving. I think the whole research society, and especially in research management, optimization, which food production is, we are evolving from multidisciplinary through interdisciplinary to transdisciplinary work, where like at that last stage, you are no longer just bringing people from different disciplines to work together. You are on top of that working with non-academic people. Like, for example, we have one study where we collaborate, not sometimes we work with industry in terms of provided question that's worth studying or data, but we work with industry to actually solve the problem. So we work with this one startup specializing for software in food industry, and they are contributing through our research. It's not just providing data or questions that's worth studying. So I think we will be seeing much more of that, like non-academia related researchers that are providing something totally different from their own personal experience and perspective, because it may be just one little thing that will spark a new idea and get us to a totally new direction. One other thing that we are seeing is also citizen science. I personally have not used it yet, but I think that that can be a really good area, especially for reduction of food waste at the consumer stage. And not only as for them to collect data, but also as a factor of change. So citizen science, even these upcycled foods, they could be, consumer science could be the ones to take it further.
That's exciting. And it's also to think outside of our discipline, like you mentioned, right? Like social scientists and physical scientists working together, hearing perspectives other than our own, because we get so into our own day to day that you're exactly right, that sometimes just to spark innovation, you need to think outside of the box that we've, put ourselves into.
Yeah, and maybe if I can just add briefly, it's not easy, because as we want to speak to other disciplines, but it's not just, you just go and talk. We don't even use the same language. So some of the disciplinary terms that I use, let's put it a different way, somebody in engineering, I have no idea what they talk about. So it takes some effort to actually learn from each other what they are doing. And then there is a moment, wow, you know what? That could actually be implemented in my area, or they hear something from us. So that actually led to quite interesting new area of research on data sharing through this, let's say, federated learning, things that somebody in my discipline didn't even know about.
That's awesome. Thank you. And I see Turner's throwing stuff into the chat again, and that's great. That's really great. As others have similar kind of links that they want to share, that's a good place for it, as well as additional questions people might have. Abby, can you tell us some things that you know about exciting new research on the horizon on preventing microbial food spoilage?
Yeah. So I guess first, we started off today with this kind of parsing the difference between food waste and food loss, and to parse it a little bit further, right? Not all of the global food waste or loss can be attributed to microbial spoilage, and like all these estimates, it's hard to parse, but I'm certain it's commodity specific, and so it's a significant but hard to define contribution to food waste and loss. And then in particular in the U.S. too, where a lot of food waste is shifted towards the consumer end of that farm to fork spectrum, it's worth noting, I think consumers have a really high quality standard and expectation for microbial quality in their food products and low tolerance for microbial spoilage issues. So research that tries to tackle issues in that space, I think kind of generally is trying to give people better control over spoilage biota. And so said another way, I really agree with all of Alejandro's points, right? We're very much in alignment on a lot of the stuff that he was saying. So just a couple areas I might point out. So, there's research innovation that you might categorize as new mitigation measures, right? Interventions, novel processes, novel antimicrobials, novel sanitation techniques to reduce the incidence of introducing spoilage biota into your food product. Another category, right, of research innovation might be trying to better understand spoilage potential. And so by better, parsing the difference between a high risk spoilage organism and a low risk spoilage organism, we can get better decisions, right, about what to do with product and ingredient disposition. So more targeted, more nuanced decision-making with that kind of work that might be centered on understanding the physiology of spoilage organisms and then designing tools to help make that differentiation, like diagnostic tools to help make that differentiation. So just as maybe a couple concrete examples for stuff that's going on at Cornell under those umbrellas, under the kind of technology side, up in Geneva, we have that high pressure processing validation center. And so that's not relevant for all products, but for products where it is relevant, you get a much extended shelf life by knocking down that spoilage biota. You retain a lot of the fresh-like qualities. And so that's an example, right, of kind of a novel alternative process. Other research we do here focuses on sanitation in food plants and understanding microbial persistence in food environments so that we reduce cross-contamination from those surfaces into foods. I mean, Julie, a lot of your presentation was kind of in this broad category as well, because a lot of those spoilage microbes that are harbored in a given environment are particularly good at growing in that food matrix and then causing spoilage in the product. So novel sanitation technologies, better sanitation and verification tools, all of that kind of goes again to reducing the introduction of this biota into your product. And then under that second category, this idea about improving our ability to differentiate high from low risk spoilage organisms. A couple examples. We do work here on Alcaine, and so that causes spoilage in juice and beverages. Part of that work includes better resolving the structure of the genus and then really pinning down what species are causing spoilage. And that includes work with a biotech company to develop diagnostic tools that use a genetic screen to predict spoilage potential. Kind of analogously in some ways, other work on yeast and mold spoilage in cultured dairy products, we're developing better subtyping methods and then working with industry to demonstrate how these tools can be used to facilitate source tracking and root cause analysis, again, with the idea that these will give you better product disposition decisions. So again, just a couple concrete examples under those broad categories of research areas, reducing kind of the level and likelihood of introducing biota, and then deciding among possible contaminants in your product, how big of a deal is it from a spoilage perspective.
Thanks, Abby. That's really exciting stuff to hear about. And yeah, I always think of high pressure processing as one of those things that if somebody hadn't innovated and thought, hey, this is worth exploring, I would have thought, a batch process, that expensive, no way. But it absolutely identified a whole host of products without this process that couldn't exist. So that's all excellent examples. Thank you. Can anyone give me an example? And we've heard some, I think, but any additional examples of a success story in which research ideas have been effectively implemented? Because that valley of death, right, is often a challenging thing to traverse between ideation and maybe proof of principle demonstration, and then actually implementation at a commercial scale to effectively reduce food waste.
I have a quick concrete example. So I went to our research fellowship, which is going into its second year, starting in a couple months here. Really excited about that. And it has been focused on consumer research. And one of the papers from last year was, or might have been more than that at this point, from some vague time in the past. One of the research findings was around consumers' willingness to pay for upcycled products, and the ways that different messaging strategies can maximize willingness to pay. And so what we ultimately found was that willingness to pay for upcycled products can be maximized when brands use rational versus emotional messaging strategies. So by quantifying the impact and making it very practical, and here's how many XYZ of this environmental impact you're creating by purchasing this upcycled product, very rational, concrete messaging strategies versus oh, buy this because there's hungry people in the world and we should, have, compassion for the plant, the environment, or whatever that looks like. Those rational messaging strategies are going to work better to increase willingness to pay. And as a result, our membership was able to integrate that feedback into their marketing strategies. And there hasn't been research done in terms of to what degree that had an impact on sales, but our brands were, and within our membership, we're certainly happy with that result and being able to integrate that into their marketing models.
Excellent. Any perspectives from anybody on the panel? Yeah, Sam, go ahead.
Yeah, just other examples of technologies coming out of the research space and then making their way into commerce and doing successfully at that. We've got Farther Farms here, right, who looked at the use of supercritical CO2 as a novel drying method, right, and then a way to extend the shelf life of products. And now, right, they're out in market, taking it here from the lab just down the hall into the space. So I think there are a lot of examples out there.
Great. Alejandro?
No, not sure if I would give an example, but sometimes I think about the change, and I don't know, the impact will be interesting to see, to go from expiration date to best before dates. And I don't know if that has had an impact. I mean, we used to have expires on this date, and now the industry has moved more to best by. And I'm not sure if that went together with the message to the consumer to say, if the product still tastes good, it's not unsafe. It's just good to use. It's up to you. If it's just 2 days past the shelf life, it's still, and it tastes good, just eat it. Don't throw it away. Don't waste it. So that's another thing that is a very basic little thing, but I don't know the consumer research, or if the consumers know about that. Sometimes I do get questions about, hey, I have this yogurt, but it expired 3 days ago. Is it okay to eat? I say, well, the longer you wait, the safer it becomes. More lactic acid, more safer and safer, but it's not going to start, it's going to start to get sour. So as long as it tastes good, go ahead and enjoy it. So because sometimes you put a shelf life for an entire platform, and some products can really go beyond that. So, but I don't know if there is any data from consumers to see if that has had an impact on them. I mean, that sometimes people are very, they don't want, if they see best before this date, they don't want to use it after that day. And they need to understand that as long as the product tastes good, most of the product is still good to consume and doesn't need to go to waste. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the impact is an interesting piece. And I think tomorrow we're going to learn a lot more on consumer perspectives and things like that. And so that'll be exciting. So those of you that are still on with us today, make sure to join back in tomorrow. But speaking of impact, maybe in a slightly different way, I'm curious the panel's thoughts on how to identify kind of the biggest bang for the buck, right? The application to target that's going to get you the biggest impact in reducing food waste. Is it, things like extending shelf life, reducing cost, right? Having the biggest cost impact, attacking something with the biggest carbon footprint, and maybe cutting back on that.
Too much inflation to reduce cost. One idea that I have, if I can go again, but that I was thinking, because I was now learning more and more about product that is being shipped on a truck, going to a warehouse, and from the warehouse going into another truck into a supermarket, and the supermarket move, and that I started to notice the amount of product damage during the distribution and transportation. And damaged product creates a lot of, I mean, I don't know, even if it is less than 1% in the, around 1% in the entire industry, it's a lot of food that is thrown away because pallets got damaged. And I'm thinking this could be a good research project for engineering distribution people to see what's new out there. We've been with pallets and cases and plastic wraps for ever. Is there anything better? Better materials, better ways to organize a truck, better ways to move the food, better ways to handle the boxes to prevent product damage. There's a lot of damaged product constantly every day at a supermarket that goes down the toilet. So it's like, it's just waste. And it's just because of regular damage, and it happens all the time. So I think there is an opportunity there to look and advance that distribution piece on the food side to reduce waste, to stop damaging cases, stop damaging product, make sure that they make it to the shelf and they're not wasted on the way. Mm-hmm.
That's a great thing to highlight something outside of what we've talked a lot about today, which is like microbial food spoilage and things like that, and other places where food damage, I guess, can occur that results in it not being attractive to consumers, whether or not it's, safe and of good quality. Abby?
Yeah, I might just briefly add, like, to your question about which of these outcomes is most important. It seems like it kind of depends who you ask. And maybe this is kind of Renata's point too, about different outcomes for different people along the supply chain. And tomorrow will be a lot about trade-off evaluation. And so I guess the point I just wanted to add is that as there's kind of increasing focus, increasing federal dollars for research, and increasing policy around changing these behaviors, it matters what the metric is. And that can drive a lot of these unintended consequences as well. So it seems like it matters who you ask in terms of what the most valuable component is or outcome.
That's an excellent perspective. And also I think it was Martin that mentioned earlier about kind of the validity of some of these metrics that a lot of us doing research in the food waste space keep throwing around, and kind of ensuring that these are accurate at least accurate-ish estimates so that we can identify the opportunities for the biggest impact. And speaking to your point, Abby, on policy, I see Caitlin threw in the chat also about research showing that consumers understand best if used by is quality and used by is safety. And there's actually a Food Date Label Act that's under consideration, but not yet passed by Congress. So policy influencing all this as well, of course. So I'm going to throw out one kind of final question to the whole panel before we wrap up here. Where do we see, or where do you see the biggest need for research innovation? And kind of similar to that, where do you see the biggest challenges in researching new interventions to reduce food waste and loss?
I can go first because this might be I feel like we're repeating some of the things we've heard throughout the day. So I will say, it seems like an area of need is to take more of a systems-based approach, right, to this problem in particular from a microbial food spoilage perspective. I mean, I can think of a lot of individual examples where having kind of a too deterministic of approach or focusing on one constituent part just didn't solve the problem. And so the challenge there, thinking about like, what is it we need to measure? How do we get good data on that seems extremely complicated. And so that's what I'll put out there as my response.
Thank you.
I would say more things. I mean, we talked about bagels that now can become chips, or Sam talked about other things that could go into ingredients for fermentation, or other things. It's like sometimes it's easy if you have a pasteurizer and you have a low temperature that you divert, you rework. But the area of rework, I mean, once you produce a lot of product and it's already in a container and something went wrong, all that has to go to trash unless there is a way to extract that for a different use. So how can we do research to say, wait, if you have this type of equipment that will extract the product and then it could be used for a different purpose, how to repurpose things instead of going into the waste stream, how can we repurpose things? But it's complicated when things are already in the package. I mean, all the things that are not being sold at a supermarket that are already packaged. I mean, how can we use that? I mean, no one's gonna go open every package and take it away. It just, there has to be a way to say, how can I use that into another value stream that can be positive instead of going into waste?
Yeah, that's another excellent point. And it brings up also this idea that it can be all the more complicated by kind of unpredictability of supply chains, right? If you did identify an intervention that could use some of these packaged food products, and then you do great and have no deviations for a period of time, which is a good thing. Understanding that could create a complexity as well.
Yep. And I'll say try to make it quick, two things, and it somewhat also relates to what Alejandro just said, is that our challenge is that right now, and Pete had talked about this earlier in the morning, is that we treat these wastes, these byproducts as waste, and there's not an easy way to handle them in a food safe manner. Our systems are not set up to capture, whether it's expired milk in the jug, how do we deal with that, to the way coming out of yogurt manufacturing or the spent grains from a brewery. Right now, the systems are designed to treat them as undervalued waste. And then the investment that you need to turn that around, to divert those streams into food applications, is a bit of a challenge. And we need support for that. And then I'd also say, when it comes to funding and research, I think there's going to be we need a lot of ideas. There's not going to be one big hit home run idea. Food is complex. The challenges for one food are very different than the other. And we need more funding for startups to play around in this space, test out novel solutions, and then develop that they have markets. I think that's what we need.
I could quickly add one more thing. I think what we need is more transdisciplinary groups that would think about potential feedback loops. And maybe a group like this, people from different backgrounds and experience and expertise, industry, entrepreneurs, everything that can go well and everything that can go wrong. And we will not even be able to think about everything, but more people will come up with more ideas than just one person who might be designing a business plan for a new product.
That's great. Well, I want to thank my panelists for joining me in today's roundtable. Sam, Renata, Abby, Alejandro, and Turner. The wide diversity of perspectives has been, I think, really exciting. Thanks to the audience for sticking through the day. And now back over to you, Martin.
Thanks, Julie, and thanks everyone for attending today. Thought it was a really interesting session that covered a lot of ground today. I think we've got to cover a lot more ground tomorrow when we move more into sort of the economics, the business side, the social sciences side of this challenge, and starting to even think about unintended consequences and how to potentially manage that. So I don't have much more to add than that. I hope I will see all of you and some more tomorrow for our meeting. I want to thank all speakers, all organizers, and all panel participants for a great day. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.